Hello, and welcome to the Landfall Post Film Conversation. This conversation is a special program of SIF Streams and the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards as part of the 2021 Cleveland Book Week, presented by the Cleveland Foundation. My name is Selena Pagan, and I am the Executive Director of the Young Latino Network, as well as the moderator for this conversation. According to a recent report by the Pew Research Center, in 2020, Hispanic, Latinos, Latinas, Latinx individuals make up nearly 1 in 5 people in the US. Furthermore, there are more Puerto Ricans on the mainland US than the island of Puerto Rico. Approximately 4.3 million Puerto Ricans live in the States compared to 3.194 million that live on the island. Today, I am honored to moderate this panel made up of Cleveland's own Puerto Rican community members who have been doing their thing in this city. I have the pleasure of working with them in all of their respective roles in their organizations and as community members who are activists and advocates for the Puerto Rican community here and abroad. And I get the pleasure of introducing to you these folks shortly. In recognizing the land upon which we reside, we express our gratitude and our appreciation to those who lived and worked here before us, those whose stewardship and resilient spirit make us residents possible on this traditional homeland of thousands of Native Americans who call Northeast Ohio home. I would like to provide an emotionally difficult material / trigger warning about some of the programming here today. I would like to note that today's program provides an open space for critical and civil exchange of ideas and a brave space for us, for our community members to share their stories. Some portions and other content during this discussion will include topics that some people may find triggering and or traumatizing. The views of all the participants today are solely of their own and do not express the views or opinions of the organizations in which they represent. The stories of Latinos, Latinas, Latinx individuals migrating to Northeast Ohio have been decades in the making. When it comes to the Puerto Rican community in Cleveland, we have seen generations of Puerto Ricans moving directly from the island or other states to call this city home. Whether you were born on the island or in the diaspora, somos borincano aunque naciera en la luna. I am joined here today by 3 incredible individuals. Ivis Maldonado, Regional MICOM Coordinator at Metro West CDO. Jose Colon, Hispanic Advisor, Business Advisor at Jumpstart Inc. And Elia Burgos, Bilingual Community Outreach Coordinator at the Cuyahoga Community Board of Elections and our Community Voter Mobilization Organizer. So let's get started. My first question is to all of the panelists, and we can whoever feels inclined to kind of start first. I just want you to tell me and the audience and each other a little bit about your journey of how you made it, what brought you to Cleveland and how you got to Cleveland, and a little bit about your story. So I'm going to kick it over to Ivis first.
Hi, I moved here like 4 years ago, exactly 4 years ago last week. After Hurricane Maria, I was a teacher in Puerto Rico, and when after the hurricane, like they started closing a lot of schools. That's when no one was working, the kids were not having the education. So I decided to move on to look for a better future for my son, and that's when I decided to move here to Cleveland. Like right now, I work as a MICOM coordinator in Metro West, and I used to work in Esperanza as a youth coordinator too. When I moved here, I struggled a lot looking for a right job to advocate what I believe in. So like a teacher, I was looking for a program where I can offer like the same opportunities to other kids. Over here, I struggle a lot when I move in because they don't accept my license from Puerto Rico. That's a big issue for a lot of people that move in over here. They don't value that degree that they have from college. So even if I have a master's degree, they don't value that over here. They don't accept my license over here. So that was one of the restrictions that I'm not able to teach in one of the schools.
Thank you, Ivis. I appreciate you sharing your story. Next, I'd like to invite Jose Colon to share.
So my story and how I got here is a little different than everybody. I moved here. I've been here 10 years now. I moved here in February 2011. And it still seems like it was yesterday, which is crazy because it's a decade, you know. But I moved here because um, when I graduated high school down in Puerto Rico, my mother received a job offer in October 2009. She moved. I stayed 2 years in Puerto Rico, and then decided that it was time to go back to mom, and that's how I ended up in Cleveland. And although my experience of Maria was here in the diaspora, here in Ohio, here in Cleveland, not like Evie's and Elia. It, I think is people should see too and know that even though we did not went through what people went through in Puerto Rico, which it still breaks my heart. We had the struggle. We had to struggle and concerns for family, friends. And so, but my story on how I got to Cleveland, what brought me to the city was it was a little different. Was my family, mom was already here, and which is funny because now slowly my parents all are here, even though they're divorced. They kind of they had to be close to us because we're three of them. We're three kids, and they all ended up moving to Cleveland. They well, one is Columbus. But that's how I got here. I went to school here, and now Cleveland is my second home. So that's because Puerto Rico will always be the first.
I hear you. I hear you. Thank you for sharing, Jose. Elia?
My connection with Cleveland started around 16 years ago when I met my husband, Steven. He was born and raised in Lakewood, and we fell in love. And I dragged him down to Puerto Rico. No, I'm lying. He came willingly. By the time Maria hit us, we were living east of the island, exactly where the hurricane made landfall. And he lost his job. My husband works in restaurants, and of course there was no electricity, no way to get to the places that he was working, no tourism because he doesn't speak that much Spanish, so he was working in touristic areas. So with that situation, he was forced to move back to Cleveland. He had been without a job for over 3 months because I don't know if you remember that before Maria, 2 weeks before Maria, Hurricane Irma hit us, slightly grazed us, and San Juan, which is the capital of Puerto Rico, was very affected. That's where he was working. So he couldn't work at his trade. We also used to bake from home, and again, no power, no electricity, no water. He moved up here, and I stayed behind for approximately 10 months trying to help my mom because my mom lost everything inside her house. She was living with me in Macau and just waiting for her to get back on track, have her a livable home. I waited, and in August 18, I started the journey. And I said I started the journey because I left on that day, but I reached Cleveland on the 20th. And that's the story we can talk about later because it's part of who I was and what I used to do in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. Thank you, Elia, for sharing. I think it's really important for us, especially as Puerto Ricans, to let people know which part of the island we're from. So I want you guys to share, de qué pueblo son, right? And I kind of want you guys to tell me a little bit about, only as much as you feel comfortable, about what, September 20th, 2017 was like for you guys. I know a lot of you have different experiences, and I know it's hard, but share what you kind of want the audience to know about your experience and what you had to live through during that time.
It was real hard. Like when that happened, it's an emotion that even if I was like 4 years ago, you can still feel in the sense of that night. Like no power, no water, like you can communicate with no one. The phone wasn't working. So even in the house, it was full dark. all that you only hear the huge noise of the wine hitting on the windows. The water came in by the windows, by the door. When you were trying to take out some water by one door, the other water was coming in by the back door. It was like, it was a really impact experience. Like, it's very emotional that time. Like, it was like 24 hours inside the house. So at the time you walk out, like, you can see like the big difference. It's something that you can struggle like thinking about it, because you go inside the house having a point of view of something that is close to your house, and then when you open the door, it's completely different place that you can even recognize the place. I mean, for my side, I have the house. It wasn't the backside of my house. The roof flied over my house, which is a 2-level house, and get straight to like 2 houses after mine in top of one of the cars. So it was something that, like, even when you think about it, I know that people say, "Oh, I understand how you feel,
Yeah.
but it's not the same when you have that same experience, and when you try to get some help and you don't receive any help. When you try to communicate with your families and you're not allowed for like 2-3 weeks, is something that can keep affecting myself. And as my son, he only talk when they mention Maria, he just like, oh mama, I can't think about that no more. It was real hard. So if for us that's like an adults, it was hard. You can imagine how the kids were struggling in that time.
Thank you, Yves. Thank you for sharing. Thank you. I know that's hard.
My experience on that day, I am a little bit older than Evie. I don't know if she remembers Hurricane Hugo and Georges, but Maria was unlike any of those. And I am from a little town called Gurabo, but at that moment I was living in Humacao, which is next to Yabucoa, where Maria made landfall. And we were trying to be prepared. I always prepare in advance because I've survived those other hurricanes, so I had everything provisions, but nothing prepares you to what came afterwards in the aspect of how your environment turned out, how it changed, and how people were struggling to get their necessities and their needs taken care of, and how the government reacted. We started getting the winds from Maria very early at night, on the 16th actually. But around 2-3 a.m. in the morning, I had to grab my husband, my mom who was staying with me, and my 4 dogs and a foster dog that I rescued 2 weeks ago, and get them all inside our walk-in closet, because the wood paneling started bolting out of the windows. We were covering it with windows, and my house is all glass all around it. And at some point, we lost all connection. We couldn't use our phones. But before we lost that ability, I recorded a voice message telling people that I was in the closet with my family, because we didn't know we were going to make it out of there alive. I wanted my family in the United States to know. My daughter was in the United States. Of course, my husband's family was up here. I wanted them to know where they could find us. Although my house is concrete, I honestly probably didn't had any risk, but at that moment, it seemed like we weren't going to make it out of there alive. The water started coming in through the windows and getting into the closet, and of course you're enclosed, dark, and all you could hear was the phone, the little battery radio that we had, and I don't know if it remembers it, but like every 5 minutes you could hear the emergency broadcast system alarm going off. And up to this day, I hear that sound, and it's triggering. The first months that I was here, and I think it was maybe 2 months after I moved to Cleveland, I was at my home and there was bad weather coming, and I heard that noise, that alarm for the first time after the hurricane, and I started shaking because I still hadn't como, as we say there, no había botado el golpe, the hit that I got, the trauma that I had, and I'm still working with it. I still haven't shaken it off, and that's how I felt during that time. The wind, as Edith is saying, it was like a howling, like a woman crying, and it was terrifying, and you could see things flying through the windows. When it was daylight outside, we're getting strong winds, and it was traumatic. It was scary, and I wish no one has to go through that again in Puerto Rico or anywhere.
Thank you for sharing, Elia.
It's, for me, it's crazy hearing Evie's and Elia's stories, because I was over here in Cleveland. I am from Trujillo Alto. I was born and raised in Trujillo Alto basically my entire life, which is right 10 minutes, about 10-15 minutes off of San Juan. And for me, Maria, that day, I felt desperation. And I just felt I can't seem to find the English word for inútil. Useless, because I couldn't do anything. Even though I have my mom and dad over here, I have all my high school friends, which to this day we talk to each other every day. I have my grandfather over there, but I didn't know. It got to a point on September. Actually, I think it was at the night of September 16th, that I didn't know anything about them anymore. So I'm sitting over here trying to think, like, all right, what do they need? What would they need? I did remember, like Elia said, George, Hurricane George, but I knew it was nothing like that. I think I was 6 when 6 or 7 Hurricane George went through Puerto Rico, and I remember it, but it was no Maria, and I knew that, and so for me it was, I just literally, I think the main word is useless, because what can I do? And I think Selena, being over here, probably agreed that she felt the same way, without me putting words in her mouth, because all people that cared or have people in the island that they care about, and we're over here, we're trying to scramble, going to the stores, trying to find things that people would need, and to then try to figure out how we're going to get them over there. We can have trucks full of stuff over here, and how are we going to get them over there? And then going into the story that later on we found, they found in Ponce thousands and thousands of water bottles. Who would even thought that was some of the stuff we sent over there? I just felt useless and more useless every day that went through. I got a little core group here, that I'm always around, and seeing them, that they just had moved, like, in August, July, from Puerto Rico. Not because of Maria, they started going to school over here at that time. So they just moved here. A month later, they're completely disconnected from their families, and they just got here. They just left Puerto Rico. So, and I saw them struggle. I saw them not being able to talk to their dad or their mom for a month. You know, I saw them get so stressed out that they could be sitting down laughing, and the next minute they remember something and they just start crying. You know, and for me, that was I'm a person, and I think everybody that is here knows this. Is that I'm a person that I like to see people smile. I like to bring happiness, and seeing them like that, what could I say? What could I have done?
Mm-hmm.
There was nothing I could do. There's nothing I could have done. And that was, I think that kind of summarizes how I felt that day,
Mm-hmm.
because it was insane.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you, Jose. You know, I think you guys brought, this perspective that I think the city doesn't understand the severity of what Hurricane Maria meant to Clevelanders, right? Like, they think that that's something that happened, somewhere, and they didn't realize how many of us were impacted, whether we were here or whether we were on the island, and how critical of a point that was for our community, right? To feel like, we couldn't do anything, even though our community mobilized and tried so hard to get resources to Puerto Rico. But then you have things like discovering these warehouses full of supplies that FEMA did not distribute to communities, right? Like, there's a lot of trust issues that we have with a lot of these entities because of some of that trauma that they've experienced, that, the island of Puerto Rico has experienced through, colonization and all the things that have happened. I know, Jose, we were talking a little bit the other day of, you sat there and you watched the film with a group of your friends. And I think one of them was actually on the island during Hurricane Maria. Correct? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So she's Evie. She's a teacher. She's a teacher. Teaches special education, and her husband is here studying with my girlfriend in Case Western University. So for the first 2 years that he was here, she was over there still at Puerto Rico finishing her degree, and that included the time Maria passed through Puerto Rico. And watching that movie, I saw her every time it got more deep, because in the film, it not that it took their time, but they explain everything so well, and whoever's the director, whoever did this, they weren't really scripts, so it was more people feelings, but whoever organized it, I gotta say, there's many movies that kind of want to depict situations like this, but hearing what she was feeling, what she was going through, and watching that movie, and how every little thing that they explain, she was like, that's exactly how I was feeling. That's exactly what I was going through. That I saw that. Like, I saw how buildings were destroyed. I saw how streets were. That's all we saw. So seeing her kind of connect the things that were in the movies, and of course she was bawling out. She was, because
it was really real, right? It was very real. Elia,
I
know, and I think Elia, I think you mentioned something like that too, right? You got to watch the documentary.
I got to watch the documentary, and I went through all the stages of mourning through that film, and I felt deeply when, and that's why I appreciate this opportunity so much. One of the girls said that the Puerto Rican is like pa'lante, onward, and we just move past through pain, but we don't take the time to process it. And as I said earlier, we are still in with the adrenaline. We're still struggling and trying to overcome the obstacles, the nature disaster, the natural disaster, the disaster that we had to go through with the government response, and then the trauma of seeing people leave. Like I had to see my husband leave, and then myself leaving my house in a rush. I couldn't even really hug my mom and said everything's going to be okay. I didn't even get to see my house for the last time because I was rushing out of the island, trying to help other people. Because I used to be an animal rescuer, part of a group called the Sato Project, and after Hurricane Maria, the SAPTA project started doing humanitarian flights, trying to reunite pets, dogs and cats that Puerto Ricans who left the island, they left them behind, and we were trying to get them together. And the day I left was the day that we had a huge flight of over 200 dogs and cats that were waiting, their family were waiting for them in Florida and United States. So we had to rush out of the island, and I just didn't get that moment of looking at my island for the last time. So I'm still struggling with that, and that's why I connected so much with that lady, is that we need to go back and recreate or try to think of what happened and then heal and move forward. So I appreciate this opportunity just because of that.
Thank you. And, it's an honor to hear your stories. And I know that as we talk about it a little bit more, we start to be able to, not completely heal from it, but to share our stories. And I think that's helpful. One of the scenes I saw that stuck out to me was when they were cleaning up one of the schools, and I couldn't help but think of Evie's. And like that time, as a teacher, right before the hurricane, knowing that there were still struggles, right, with schools closing and things like that. And then, Evie's, you have 2 master's degrees, right? You have your education, and then, not being able to come and move as easily to Cleveland to get to pick up where you left off. Can you talk a little bit about like your time in the schools?
In Puerto Rico?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think like education in Puerto Rico is like, it's hard to say, but it's poor. But at the same time, we try to make it work. So after hurricane, like I wait like almost like a month after they allow us to go inside the school and check around. And the structures, they are so old that most of them were like real damage. The ramps, the stairs, like we used to leave all the documents inside the classroom, so all was like wet, nothing was working. Like the bad thing of the education, they don't keep track of the things on a computer, so you have everything on papers. So all the information about, because one of my masters in special education, all the information about those kids, like they were like gone. So that's when they decided they don't know what time we will be able to start working again, when the students are gonna start having education again. It took almost like a month or 9 to some students go back inside the building to start receiving some education, and there were like others that take almost a year to go back inside the school. That's when I decided to move over here to Cleveland. I picked Cleveland because I have family over here. It was like being a single mom, it was hard just to jump in like anywhere in any other state. And it was hard at the time that I moved here. And when you go to apply to any CMSD school, they don't allow you to teach because they don't care about your degree. They just care about the license of the state. I have like 6 years experience in public schools in Puerto Rico, and they don't care none of those years of experience. They just want you to go back to college, take some courses, maybe like a year and a half or 2, and then you had to pay it, and then they will decide and take the Ohio State test, and then they will decide if you are allowed to go teach on CMSD school, which is something that is struggle, because when you move here, like you left everything behind. Like you spend all the money, you were working for a long time, so you don't have no backup money to like start doing again, and then the student loan is too high. So when I moved here, I started looking for a job where I can, even if I'm not able to teach inside a building, like a work where I can like teach any kind of students, give them programs where they can learn different things in the community. It maybe not be the same experience of teaching directly in a building, but it made me feel like something that I'm doing something worth it about what I love to do, which is teach. And then I started working in one of the organizations as a youth coordinator. I'm working with summer camps, creating some of the curriculums, and that's how I'm in like struggling and dealing right now, making work and happen right now.
Thank you. You know, I think at this point it's a really good time to talk about, you know, we've heard your stories of coming from Puerto Rico and some of the stuff that you guys did in Puerto Rico. And then I think one of the biggest pieces that I want to shine a light on is the amazing work you guys are doing here in Cleveland in our backyards, right? And like, I think it's really important for the audience to understand that when you are a Latino, Latina, Latinx individual doing work in here in the diaspora, you're always going to carry that the weight of your country or where you come from in your heart and in the work that you do. And in particular, I know you all very closely, and I know that, you know, it's funny because Jose and I have had this conversation. I was born and raised in Cleveland, right? And oftentimes when you're raised in the diaspora, you have this complex issues of identity of like, ni de aquí ni de allá, right? You're neither you're neither from here nor there, and you never feel like enough. And I think that narrative, we've seen it shift so that we can no longer say that to each other, right? Because we're from here and there. And I think you guys moving from the island to Cleveland and making Cleveland a part of you is a very big, you know, part of that. I want to talk a little bit about, you know, what is driving you today? What is some of the work that you guys are doing today? And like, where are the gaps for our community, right? We all have seen that there are gaps in the systems and in which we're operating in and navigating, and how there are gaps that don't get the resources to the community or the information to the community. So let's start talking a little bit about some of the work that you're doing today. Whether it's voter mobilization, economic mobility, or, you know, youth programming. I think it's really important for people to hear about, you know, your relationship to this work and the drivers that it has. And I'll kick it over to Elia.
Well, I've been an attorney for 20 years. 16 of those years, I was a public defender in Puerto Rico. And when I moved here, I had the understanding that I could go through the process of admission without examination, and I needed attorneys, at least one attorney, to basically present me to the court, and that's how I got into what I'm doing right now. Because I met a Latino attorney, and he said, "Well, that's great, but we have to get you working because that process takes a long time." And he said, "I think there's an opening at the Board of Elections." And I remember him saying, "You're probably overqualified." And I said, "Well, it doesn't matter because first of all, I need a job. And second, I need to connect with my community." And that was the job, doing community outreach to Latino voters. And I had the blessing of getting the trust of the community, because this is a position, the position I'm working on right now, was something that the community fought very hard to have there permanently at the Board of Elections. And a question that always comes up in every conversation I have when I'm doing outreach is why Puerto Ricans don't vote here in the United States. Because in Puerto Rico, the voter turnout is upwards 90%. And this is by no means truth, but it's probably an educated guess from what I've experienced. And you have to ask yourself, why would someone that was just let down by the government down in their island, they had to leave, will trust any government or politician here? And that's one of the reasons why I think the voter turnout is so low. People who move to Cleveland, they move or to Ohio in general moved here after the layoff from Fortunio governor, and then they left after Maria. They left after the earthquakes because the government failed. So this is one of the things that we have to work with our mentality, just letting them know, and also the client mentality that what are they giving me? It's not what are they giving me, it's how we can all connect and get together and make them see the power that we have, the asset that we are as part of the election and political power. I am currently trying to sit for the bar. It's very expensive cost, because after I thought I could do it without examination, I called the Supreme Court, and no, I can't. I have to sit for the bar because Puerto Rico is not a jurisdiction of the United States. So my law school is ABA accredited, is Middle State Higher Education accredited, and I am admitted to the federal bar in Puerto Rico, which I took the bar to be able to practice, because it's the only jurisdiction in the United States that requires a bar to practice there. And yet, I can't be an attorney. I have to sit for the bar. And I understand that, well, the courts have their way of handling business with attorneys, because there's a public interest there. But the political situation in our island is not allowing us to maybe thrive here. And sometimes Puerto Ricans think, oh, why I'm going to vote? That's not going to help anything. It's going to help you here, and it's going to help our people in the island, because we are a power to be reckoned with. And it's time for us to understand that and make use of it. When I moved here, I moved close to the November 18 general election, and I wasn't going to vote. I didn't feel like I had the right. But even before I knew I was going to become or do the job that I'm doing right now, I just couldn't keep away. I just couldn't not vote, because that's it's my blood. I by no means advocate for any party, but I advocate for the power of the people, how organized movements, how concerted actions like voting bring you to the forefront and tell these people up there in the government, hey, this is something that we better look out for, and we better help them and have them on our side. So thanks to Young Latino Network, I have to say it's one of the most active Latino groups out there, and every time you are the key to the community, because otherwise that's a characteristic of minority populations. We are very wary of the government. So if we don't have the key to the barrio, to the community, we can't reach them. So thanks to the Young Latino Network, because you always had your doors open for me.
No, Elia, you know que esta es tu casa, and you know, one of the things that I just heard you say es que somos más y no tenemos miedo. That is my line. That is what I love to live by, you know, and it's because of you guys is what the network is made up of, right? It's us. So thank you for sharing, Elia, because that is so important in the work that we're trying to do. And, you know, all of this work ties together because, you know, we need voter power, but we also need to build generational wealth. And we need to talk about like our financials, right? And financial literacy and what that looks like here in the US versus the island. And that is segueing over to Mr. Colon, because that's my guy right here. He's my financial advisor. He is the GOAT.
It's funny because you know, I heard the segue before you said it. You know, I'm like, I see you. I see what you're doing. Yeah. So to talk about like my role here in Cleveland, I'll talk about my past role, which changed about 3 weeks ago, and then I'll talk about my new role that started 3 weeks ago. So my past role for the last 4 years, I've been working in the community through a service I was providing that was called the Community Financial Centers. So what we were doing at the Community Financial Centers was we were teaching financial education to minority groups. Of course, me, as specifically, not limited, but specifically to the Hispanic, Latino, Latinx community. And for me, I mean, for me, that's been the best job I've ever had. You know, I learned so much. So what I was doing is I was teaching financial education from the most basic. I mean, we were going over credit reports, we were going over managing debt, we were going over building credit, rebuilding or starting, buying house, buying a car, managing student loans. You know, I've been to dealerships with my clients. You know, I've stayed. Most recently, I've stayed till 7, 8, 9 p.m. emailing with loan officers to make sure things get closed. And for me, it's something a lot of communities that do the same work. I try to make it seem to go hand in hand, because one of the gaps that Hispanic community has is access. You know, the language barrier is a real thing, and although EDs, everybody here that was born in an island might be able to speak Spanish, I guarantee you, given the chance, we would speak Spanish rather than English, because that's what we feel more comfortable in. And imagining talking about business stuff, talking about finance stuff, which is a language that even people on the same English don't understand, how would they feel? So I was that access. I was, you know, teaching them, giving them the education that they needed so they can, like Selena said, start generating wealth, start creating a legacy for their families. Now, that's a little summary into what I used to do. Now, in my new role as a Hispanic business advisor, I'm going to be doing a very similar, well, not that similar, the same approach, which is hand on hand, just going to the business and helping Hispanic entrepreneurs build and have a strong foundation, a strong plan, so their business can be successful, profitable. Because I believe with the things that I've learned through my positions, a small business in the communities like ours, minority, are the heartbeat. If our small businesses are thriving, our community is gonna start to thrive. It's gonna start to move up. It's gonna start slowly getting out of that hole. I feel with this position, I'm gonna be able to open a river of resources that weren't accessible because of different reasons, language barrier, geographic position, you know, because they're in the east side, and we all know here that anybody from the west side ain't crossing over. I still don't understand it, but I know it. I know it. So giving them that access now from organization that has a river of resources, now having that for the small businesses in the Hispanic community, creating programs that closes the gaps that the Hispanic businesses have, and just helping them build a business that is sustainable, profitable. And then as a third hat, which is something that YLN, I do sit in the board of YLN, that we are eventually going to bring to once things settle, is maybe do some of those programming with financial education on my past role. You know, I might not get paid to do that anymore, but that's still something I love. That's still something that I think is needed. And even if it's not me doing the teaching, I know we can create some programming to help that area. But that's my roles down in the island. That's what I've been doing in the island, which sounds like a lot, but I'm blessed. I'm blessed to have the opportunity to be an advocate to help the Hispanic community, and I will continue to do so as long as I get the green light. And that's I think that's it. I think I can go over, but we'll be here till
yeah, we don't worry, guys. We warned everyone that you got a group of Puerto Ricans on this call. We will keep talking, so we have to check ourselves. But no, thank you so much, Jose, for sharing and for the work that you and Elia are doing. Lastly, Evis, I want to talk a little bit about your role now with MyCom and kind of some of the things that you're seeing now working at a CDC, understanding I worked in the CDC as well at the Community Development Corporation, and understanding that system and its difficulties and challenges. But I want you to kind of share about your work.
Yeah, it's real good. It's a new challenge sometimes because, like, even if I'm not teaching, I'm be able to try to offer other organizations in the area, which is like Clark Foods in Ohio City and Tremont, trying to advocate and find a perfect program that match the need of the students and the kids in the community. And sometimes it's good to have the background in education because that way you can approach more to those students and you really know what they really need. So going around and looking and trying to offer them to be able to give those programs to those kids is good. It made me feel like I'm teaching too, because I like to be helpful. And if this organization is gonna offer this program, I always tell them I wanna go. I wanna make part of that because I wanna be able to look, like I say, that if you work close to them, you really know what they really need. And sometimes it's real good for me because, like, the neighborhoods that I'm working at, the Hispanic is real good. It's full of Hispanics. So sometimes you go there and those kids are shy and they don't want to talk. It's not because they don't want to talk, because they don't understand. They don't know how to explain in English what they really want, what they really need. So for me to being able to go there and talk to them in Spanish, and they tell me like, oh, I need this for me. I would like to have this program over here. So I try to make it happen because after Maria, like, the Hispanic community over here is keeping growing and growing every year. And having Jose and in financial and having Elia in like being a lawyer, something like that, it's gonna be helpful for us in the future because we can explain to them, like, they can understand how we feel, what we need, how we can communicate with them in Spanish, because that makes us like feel more comfortable. As Hispanic, we like to talk a lot, and in English, sometimes they struggle because they don't know how to talk English. So, but in Spanish, like, we can make it happen. We can make them feel how we feel, and we can like have all the resources that our community needs right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Evis. You guys brought up a lot of good points, and to echo, the language barriers are one thing, but we also want to push our allies and all the organizations to like really understand and be intentional about cultural competency, right? There's language competency, but you guys have to understand how we function, right? How we as our, in these spaces want to ensure that we can celebrate our cultures and celebrate our identity with not having to assimilate to dominant culture. And I think that's really important. And I think that, we've created spaces for each other as professionals, right? To be able to be as Puerto Rican, as Mexican, as Latino, Latina, Latinx as we want to be in these spaces. And that is so important for us. And so, there's so much that we can continue to talk about, right? Like, there are so many things that have happened in Puerto Rico and here in the diaspora, that, we're just opening a tiny piece of that window, but there is so much more to talk about. And I hope that we continue to have these opportunities and support from, organizations and foundations like the Cleveland Foundation and SIF to continue these, all these important things that mean so much to us in our everyday lives. So at this point, I just want to say thank you to our special guests and our audience for joining us for this important conversation. For more information about the SIF Streams and the Anisfield Book Awards program, please visit clevelandfilm.org or anisfield-wolf.org. Thank you, and thank you to our guest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.